Well, it seems the poor could pay the biggest price as the crippling drought continues in many parts of the country. Thousands of people buy their food from informal traders every day, but a new report suggests they're in trouble with prices set to rocket. Let's go live now to Cape Town. Standing by is Gareth Haysom. He's one of the researchers at the African Centre for Cities. Gareth Haysom, good evening to you and welcome. So explain to us then how the drought would affect urban dwellers. You refer to something as the invisible crisis. What is it?
Jeremy, good evening. One of the great challenges around the whole food system is how food is accessed and purchased through society. And for the urban poor, particularly the urban poor, the informal traders are an essential market access point. But they operate on very slight margins, and when the prices increase, it's very difficult for them to absorb any of those price increases. And as the poor are unable to afford most of the increasing prices, they are then forced to change what they purchase and how they purchase, and so reduce the diversity of their diets. And so what the informal traders are faced with is that what was part of their product offering is now being pushed out of affordability for their consumers, and they are now being forced to try and restructure how they operate.
At this point, are the urban poor, as you refer to them, as already starting to feel the impact of this, as the drought has been with us for some time?
I think they've been feeling the pressure since the 2008 food crisis, really, and I think the drought is just compounding that. And prices, along with exchange rate fluctuations, those prices are already starting to be felt by those consumers, and they are already starting to respond to those challenges.
Have you quantified this? Do we have a sense of the numbers involved?
We've done research across a number of African cities. So we initially did work in 2008, and we've reviewed that in 2013. With the drought only coming in now, we haven't seen any specific quantification of that. This is now from this research that is we're starting to get the data from that at this moment in time. So we haven't got any specific quantifications around exact numbers, but what we are seeing is an increase in the amount of people who are moving out of formal employment, and possibly as a result of the drought as well, and now trying to find employment in other areas. One of those areas is the informal economy.
So certainly the situation can't be marginalized. You're also suggesting that it's a problem, it's at our doorstep, but we don't seem to see it because there's also something called a rural bias, which is perhaps easier to spot and maybe even easier to quantify.
I think any notion of food and every mention of food assumes that it's a question of, and particularly food security, means trying to get more food into the food system and growing more food. And as a result of that, our policy approach, a lot of the approach from multiple actors in the food system has been to say, let's focus on agriculture, and agriculture translates into a particularly rural focus, which misses the urban space. This is then compounded by this agricultural orientation and the rural bias that then sees the policy space held in a national department of agriculture in this case, and so that the urban space and certainly urban governance and government have no direct urban mandate to engage in the food system. So they're operating without a mandate really, and are really the first who have to respond in a predominantly urbanized country like South Africa. They're the ones who have to respond to these urban challenges. So
a very disturbing situation. Is there a way then of bridging that urban gap? In other words, looking for a workable and sustainable solution, given that this drought is set to continue for some time?
I think one of the first places that we need to focus is to see what the informal traders are doing, how they're responding. There's huge knowledge within that economy. They know how to navigate this particular economy and how to try and work to find ways to enable food access and to try and do that. So they have to be a key constituent in any discussions that takes place. And that means that city governments and a number of other spheres of government have to recognize the informal sector as a key actor in the food security challenge and how they might respond to that and need to engage. But also urban government needs to have a greater mandate to be able to then start planning and working with the sector to try and engage with them, to try and find ways in which they can make their operating environment easier for them, and a space in which they can trade freely without fear of Operation Clean Sweeps, etc., that would then force them off the streets.
Just finally, given, as you point out, the resilience then of urban traders, do we have any sense at this point, given the problem is with us anyway, as to how they're coping, what kind of mechanisms they have possibly resorted to?
There are a number of mechanisms, one of which is a lot of owners are selling their stores to foreign traders who are now paying rents to South African traders who are now landlords instead of actually operating them. Another way is to see how, or potentially learn from other traders who are in the sector as well. So trying to identify where the bargains are, not targeting just one particular wholesaler, but going to find out which wholesalers are offering deals to try and reduce those very narrow margins and enable them to be able to get greater variety in their stores, but also being able to sell food at a lower price.
It's called the Invisible Crisis. Gareth Haysom, researcher at the African Centre for Cities, talking to Newsnight from Cape Town. Thank you very much.